Yeah, you got it.
All right, we're in 2 Chronicles chapter number 10, and it's a good chapter. It covers a lot of stuff in this little old chapter. I mean, it's 19 verses, but then we've had some smaller than that. But this chapter still covers a lot of stuff that's going on after the death of Solomon. And but we'll begin in verse 1, and it says, "And Rehoboam went to Shechem, where all Israel come to make him king." So, Rehoboam was the son of Solomon, and he wasn't going to be like his daddy, and he had good examples that he saw in David, his grandfather, and in his daddy Solomon, up to a point. But we're going to see, and we're going to flip back in just a few minutes, and we're going to see some stuff that was not right in Solomon's life that caused some of the stuff that's going on in this chapter. So, but we'll get to that in a minute. But Rehoboam was just, he was in the lineage of David, and that's what God had promised David, that, he would keep somebody in that lineage on the throne. But, Rehoboam is a knothead. But in verse 2 it says, "And it came to pass, when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who was in Egypt, whither he had fled from the presence of Solomon the king, heard it, that Jeroboam returned out of Egypt." So, and back over in the book of 1 Kings, around chapters 9, 10, 11, 12 through there, we read about Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. That's some wild names, but, I don't understand some of their names, and some of them's really hard to pronounce, but if I'm pronouncing Nebat correctly, I have no idea, but that's close enough. But a lot of things happened, and Solomon and Jeroboam didn't get along, so Jeroboam fled to Egypt. And then when he heard that Solomon was dead, I'm coming back, and no doubt he was hoping to maybe get a position, maybe might even been hoping that, hey, you know what, maybe they'll make me king. But that wasn't going to happen. But he come back from Egypt, and it says, "And they sent and called him. So Jeroboam and all of Israel came and spake to Rehoboam, saying," so, all people knew Jeroboam, and so they got him. And they said, kind of wanted him to be their spokesman, because closer to the end of Solomon's reign, he got pretty rough. And, he ruled with, I guess you could say, a thumb of iron. He kept his thumb, it was his way or no way. And taxes were really high because of all the building and everything that was going on during the time of Solomon. It took a lot of money to build all that stuff. Even though Solomon was rich, he's like, the people can help pay for this. So it was really high taxes. So they're wanting Jeroboam to come and be a spokesman to Rehoboam. And he says, "Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore ease thou somewhat the grievous servitude of thy father and his heavy yoke that he put upon us, and we will serve thee." So, they're making Rehoboam really a good offer. Here Solomon has died, and Rehoboam is a new king, and, they said, we'll serve you if you'll just kind of lower the taxes a little bit, lower our service to you somewhat. And, and I mean, that's understandable. And, it's just like in this country, when folks began to come from England and everywhere out of Europe, to this new world, to the new country, basically the British was in control of pretty much everything. And, high taxes. There was taxation on everything, and they just kept raising the taxes. And, if you remember, with the Boston Tea Party, what started it was taxation without representation. They didn't let the people here have any voice in, and that's kind of what had gone on here. So they knew Jeroboam was a good speaker, so they get him to come to Rehoboam and plead with him. Hey, you know what? Kind of help us out a little bit. If you'll help us out, we'll serve you. Won't be any problem whatsoever. But this is what Rehoboam says. And he said unto them, come again unto me after 3 days, and the people departed. So he's like, well, give me 3 days to think about it, and let me discuss it with the elders and this kind of stuff, and then in 3 days I'll have you an answer. So they, Jeroboam and all the Israelites agreed to that, and and King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men that had stood before Solomon his father, while he yet lived, saying, what counsel give you me to return answer to this people? So, Rehoboam does go to the older people. They were supposedly wiser, and, that's the same thing today. Older people have been through a lot more than younger folks. And if you can seek advice from them and this kind of stuff, a lot of times it'll help you. You might not go through as much trouble by listening to them. So, Rehoboam does go to the older folks and begin to ask them, what do I need to do? What do I need to do for these people? And they spake unto him, saying, if thou be kind to this people, and please them, and speak good words to them, they will be thy servants forever. And now, this older generation was telling him the truth. And that's what they had told him. If you'll just ease up on the way your father was doing us, we'll serve you. It won't be any problem. We'll serve you till you die, basically, is what they're telling him. So the older generation here tells him, you know what, if you'll kind of go easy with them and not just be somebody that is, just mean and it's my way or the highway kind of deal, then they'll serve you forever if you don't do that. So, I don't know why he didn't listen to that counsel. But in verse 8 it says, but he forsook the counsel which the old men gave him, and took counsel with the young men that were brought up with him that stood before him. And now I thought about this as I read this lesson again today. I was thinking, a lot of the younger generations that's been elected in our Congress, Lord have mercy, I don't know what, if they had their way, we'd be in a world of trouble right now. They'd take everything you got and give it to somebody else to make sure everybody's got equal amounts of it. But see, that don't work. Socialism is communism. That does not work. And, we'd be in a world of trouble if we just took counsel with them and listened to, just like that one Congress lady. You hear more about her than anybody in Congress just about every day. She's wanting to do away with cars, planes, just any means of travel other than trains. And I'm thinking, what are we going to do here in Nashville? How am I going to get to Valhalla? How am I going to do? What am I going to do? We're going to be in a world of trouble. And I can hitch the train and go to Willacoochee, but there ain't nothing no more in Willacoochee than there are here. So, and she's wanting to do away with cows. She said, cows emit gases that affect the environment. You know, and I told Sonia the other day, I said, well, I could tell her, well, I'll help do something about it. I'll help eat all of them I can eat, you know. But I don't, you know, but I mean, if we listen to that kind of stuff, I mean, you know, it's off the wall. You know, I'm like, Lord, have mercy. But, you know, but here, that's what Rehoboam, he's listening. He forsook the counsel of the old men, and he's taking counsel with the younger men that grew up with him. And, you know, it's sad. And he said unto them, what advice give you that we may return answer to this people, which have spoken to me, saying, ease somewhat the yoke that thy father did put upon us. In other words, you know, they're wanting, you know, the taxes eased up and a little more freedom and a little, you know, a little less hardship. And they told him, we'll serve you. Basically, they're telling him, we'll serve you forever as long as you live. If you'll ease up on the yoke that's on us, you know, it's a burden to them. They couldn't hardly take care of their families. It was so burdensome. I mean, here's Solomon, before he died, he's the richest man in the world, and he's just raking it in from these people to build palaces, to build whatever he wanted to. And this, I mean, it's sad. You know, but, you know, Rehoboam is, you know, what do we need to tell them? What do we need to do? And the young men that were brought up with him spake unto him, saying, thus shalt thou answer the people that spake unto thee, saying, thy father made our yoke heavy, but make thou it somewhat lighter for us. Thus shalt thou say unto them, my little finger shall be thicker than thy father's loins. In other words, you know what? You thought it was rough with my daddy? It's fixing to get rough. The pressure I'm going to put on you with just my little finger is more pressure than my daddy put on you all together. So, you know, he's fixing to be ugly. And, you know, but all this has taken place because what had happened in Solomon's life. And we'll get to that in just a minute. And, you know, it goes on in verse 11. For whereas my father put a heavy yoke upon you, I will put more to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. You know, that's bad. You know, he's just telling them, you know, you thought it was bad with my daddy? You're fixing to experience bad. You'll barely have enough to buy you a loaf of bread or the meal or what grain to make your bread. You're not going to have much left. So, and he says, then if you're not willing to do it, he says, my daddy chastised you with whips. He said, but I'll chastise you with scorpions. In other words, his chastisement was going to be like 10 times worse than what his father's was. If they couldn't pay, or if they wouldn't pay, you know what, we're gonna take it out of your hide. You know, so it's a bad situation. And now, throughout the reign of David, you know, when David was made king, you know, Israel was split into two separate countries. It was Judah and it was Israel. But when David was made king, people from the northern 10 tribes came to David. We want you to be our king too. So it came back together. It was not divided any longer. And then throughout Solomon's reign, it was not divided. But we're about to have some problems here. And we're going to see a division again with the 10 tribes in the north and then the two southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, which would take the name of Judah. So, but, you know, Rehoboam is foolish. in what he's doing. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, as the king bade, saying, Come again to me on the third day. And the king answered them roughly. And King Rehoboam forsook the counsel of the old men. So he's like, I'm not listening to them old folks. You know, it's kind of, I thought about this when I read this verse. You know, when I was about 15 or 16, I knew more than my mom and daddy. You know, they were crazy. They didn't know the times. They didn't know what young folks were supposed to do and this kind of stuff. And they're old fogies and, you know, just don't bug me, you know. And that's kind of what Rehoboam is doing here. He forsook the counsel of the older people, the ones that were telling him the right thing to do. You know, that's sad. You know, that happens in a lot of young folks' lives today. They don't listen to their mom and daddy. But I believe what the Bible says. The Bible says if you'll raise up a child in the way that he should go, you know, he may depart at some point, but the Bible says when he gets older, he'll come back to that, because he'll remember those teachings and he'll begin to think, you know what mom and daddy told me was better than what I'm doing right now. And I've told mom and daddy, I wish I'd have took a whole heap more of their advice than what I did. I'd have been a lot better off today in a lot of ways than what I am. You know, and you know, it's sad that I'm hard-headed. You know, that's just all there is to it. I get hard-headed. And, you know, but I wished I'd have listened to them instead of rejecting their advice. So, and that's what Rehoboam's doing. He's rejecting the advice of the older men, which is the sad thing and the wrong thing to do. And answered them after the advice of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add thereto. My father chastised you with whips, but I'll chastise you with scorpions. So now he's sharing with these people, this is what's going to happen. Don't come ask me to lighten up. It's fixing to get heavier on you. You're fixing to really experience a yoke around your neck. You know, that's sad. Because that's, I mean, you want any quicker way to turn somebody against you, you put burdens on them. And I'm talking about heavy burden on where they're just weighted down all the time. They just can't do what they need to do for themselves and especially for their family. You don't think that won't upset some people? In a heartbeat. So, but then in verse 15, so the king hearkened not unto the people, for the cause was of God. God was allowing this to happen, and we're going to get to the reason in just a second. That the Lord might perform his word, and we're going to flip back over and read some of what God said, which he spake by the hand of Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. And now, flip back over to the book of 1 Kings chapter number 11. Keep your hand at 2 Chronicles 10 and flip back over 1 Kings chapter 11. You know, here's some of the bad things that Solomon did that God had told them. He had specifically told the Israelite people not to do these things. And beginning in verse 1 it says, But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, the Edomites, the Zidonians, and the Hittites. God had specifically told them, do not intermarry with foreign people. Because God knew that whether it was a man marrying a foreign woman or a woman marrying a foreign man, they were going to be pulled away from God. So, and I mean, he's marrying just, well, look at verse 3. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. So he had 1,000 women that he was taking care of. You know? I mean, and his wives turned away his heart. So right there is one thing that caused what's going on. But now jump down to verse 9. In 1 Kings chapter 11, it says, "And the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice." God had appeared to Solomon twice. Don't do this. Don't do this. But, you know, Solomon's hard-headed. "And he commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which the Lord commanded." You know, the more of these strange women, and what he's talking about is women of other countries, the Gentiles. The more of those people that he married, the more different gods was brought in to his home.
That's the reason he was telling them not to intermix.
That's it. Because they served idols, they served about anything. It didn't matter. You know, a tree, a door, or whatever, it didn't matter. That could become their god. And with Solomon bringing these strange people in, then that got his attention off God. So now we see what's happening. God is allowing this to take place. He's going to get these folks' attention. You know, Rehoboam, he's going crazy. I mean, he had, you know, no doubt he knew his grandfather, David. He saw the example that David set. Solomon, at the beginning of his kingship and going through, you know, he seemed to be a good, godly person. No doubt Rehoboam saw that example. But, you know, then closer to, you know, what Solomon's doing here with taking all these strange women, strange gods, you know, what we do a lot, I've had people tell me before, what I do ain't going to affect nobody, but it does. What we do in our everyday life affects people all around us. You know, people are looking at our life. If we proclaim to be a Christian, they're looking. They're watching to see, is that person living? Well, they're proclaiming to be a Christian and they're doing this, this, and this. You know, I reckon I can do it. It's all right. So see, what have you done already? You've got somebody straying that's getting farther away from God that maybe didn't even know God. And that's sad, because our life should be a light to people. You know, and whatever we do in our life should be something that becomes a Christian, and that is an example of Christ, so that we might lead people to him, not push them away. But with what all's going on here and what's going on in Solomon's life, and I mean, if you read all the way down in chapter 11 to about verse 39, I think it is, you know, all that verse 39 says in this chapter, "And I will for this afflict the seed of David, but not forever." You know, so it's coming about now with Rehoboam. God says, you know, things are going to happen because of your stupidity. You know, you're marrying 700 women, and you got 300 concubines, and all of them are not Jewish people. You know, so he's gotten way away from God at this point. So that had to have an effect on Rehoboam's life. You know, hey, y'all come to me and wanting me to slack down on what my father did, and Don't worry about that. We're going to tighten it up. We're going to make it an even heavier burden on you. Don't ask me for this and that. But God allowed that. Verse 15 shares that God allowed that to happen because of what Solomon had done. You know, Solomon saw a good example in David. Solomon saw in David's life a person that sinned, but he also saw in David's life a person that repented to God, asked God to forgive him for what he had done wrong. And you know, as David got older, the closer he got to God. So that's the example that Solomon was seeing. But you know what? Our parents could be the number one saints in heaven, and you know what? If we don't want to follow what example they set, we don't have to. We can stray off and do whatever we want to. I've been made to do this all my life, and you know, and I've told people in churches that, you know, I was drugged when I was a young. I was drugged to this church and that church, and you know, I didn't have no choice. When it was time to get up and go to church, Mom and Daddy didn't take, hey, I just don't feel good today. You know, if you wasn't throwing up or running a fever, you were getting ready to go to church. That's it.
They were going to drag you somewhere.
Yeah. So, you know, but Solomon saw a good example. You know, there's none of us perfect, not one. That we all sin and come short of the glory of God. But when our children and our grandchildren see that, hey, you know what? Daddy or Papa or whatever, you know, they did something wrong, but you know what? They've asked God to forgive them. And they see that you can keep serving God and go. What an example that is for them to see. Rather than marrying 700 women and 300 concubines. Lord have mercy. I tell you, I'd be crazy. You know,
I just can't afford more than all that, alone 300.
You know, he had 1,000. So, you know, and Solomon was the wisest man in the world. But, you know, maybe something kind of happened to some of that wisdom closer to the end of his life. I don't know. But God said he was the wisest person to ever been. So. But that still doesn't mean that he couldn't sin, that he couldn't get out of the will of God. And he was out of God's will, and then these things began to happen because of what he did. Our life affects people. The sins that we commit can have an effect on other people's lives. They don't have to pay for my sin, but the sins I commit can have an effect on other people's lives. You know, if I were to go out and kill somebody, you know, just, hey, you know what, I want to see what it feels like to kill somebody. Go out and shoot somebody in the head. You know, when I get caught and go through all this stuff and go to jail and maybe the death penalty, whatever, you don't think that that's not going to have an effect on my family's life? You don't think that won't have an effect on the way people treat them after that? Sure it will. And, it, you know, not only my immediate family, what do you think it would do to this church? Lord have mercy. You know, I mean, what we do affects others. So, and what Solomon had done is affecting the life of Rehoboam. And now we see evidence of that. Now, verse 16, it says, when all Israel saw that the king would not hearken unto them, the people answered the king, saying, what portion have we in David? And we have none inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to your tents, O Israel. And now, David, see to thine own house. So all Israel went to their tents. So now we have a division in Israel again. You're going to have Israel and you're going to have Judah. So, you know, that's sad. God does not like division. God is not the author of confusion. But when we let sin come into our life, when we do things, and Solomon was doing this stuff really intent. Do you think he mistakenly married 700 women? No. Do you think he mistakenly brought 300 concubines home with him? No. Sometimes we may do something wrong and we really don't realize it until later. And and we ask God to forgive us, and that's fine. But if we just intentionally, that's bad. That's not good. And that's what Solomon had done, and see, it's having an effect on his son. And now we have a division in the kingdom again. Now God's not pleased with division. So it says, but as for the children of Israel that dwelled in the cities of Judah, Rehoboam reigned over them. So he had Judah, and the tribe of Benjamin was what he was going to reign over. Then King Rehoboam sent Hadoram, that was over the tribute. He was over the taking up of money and just pretty much a lot of the work for the king. So, but he sent Hadoram, that was over the tribute, and the children of Israel stoned him with stones that he died. Hey, don't send nobody to us. You're not our king. He sent this man to them, maybe to set up some way to collect taxes or whatever. They stoned him to death. Hey, don't come up here talking you're going to raise our taxes. No. It's sad. It's really not funny. But then again, they're not going to put up with it. Hey, you know what? You send somebody else up here and see what happens. We're going to stone this rascal. It's sad. But see how far they've gotten away from God, and it all stemmed back from what Solomon did. It's sad. But they stoned him to death, and he died. But King Rehoboam made speed to get him up to his chariot to flee to Jerusalem. Rehoboam's kind of along with him, and he sees what's going on. Boy, he gets that chariot in high gear, buddy. He's going back to Jerusalem. He's headed to town. And Israel rebelled against the house of David unto this day. So there was a divided kingdom. And it's sad that it was divided, because God did not want it divided. But because of the sin, God allowed it to happen. God doesn't do evil. We serve a perfect, righteous God. But God will allow things to come that will have an effect and change things. So, anybody have anything on these verses?